Olivia Red, 31, carried an invisible weight on her shoulders. In Seattle, where she lived, she was quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, considered the family disappointment. This label wasn't openly discussed at every Sunday dinner, but it hung in the air, a persistent discomfort. The reason was clear. She had dropped out of medical school in her second year. To her family, especially her father, who dreamed of seeing her in a white coat, it was as if a bright future had been thrown out the window. Olivia had thrown herself into her studies, but the pressure, the long hours, and the constant demand for perfection had led to complete burnout. It was as if the flame within her had been extinguished, leaving her without the energy to continue. Leaving school wasn't an easy decision. It was a necessary surrender to her own mental health. This choice, however, came at a high price. Her father, once proud and full of plans for his doctor daughter, had distanced himself. It wasn't an explosive fight, but a gradual withdrawal, a heavy silence that spoke louder than any argument. To him, it seemed Olivia had given up on a golden path, one that would guarantee respect and stability. Olivia's mother, in turn, tried to soften the situation, but without success. She told everyone, with a forced smile and a glint of sadness in her eyes, that Olivia was just taking some time, a pause, to reassess, to breathe. But deep down, Olivia knew it was a desperate attempt to mask her daughter's failure. This phrase, though spoken with affection, sounded like a constant reminder that she hadn't met expectations. The pressure to be someone she wasn't, or couldn't be anymore, was suffocating. Olivia found herself trapped between the expectation of a prestigious career and the reality of her own burnout. She didn't want to disappoint, but she simply couldn't continue on the path that had been laid out for her. This decision, which should have been a relief, had become a burden of guilt and family misunderstanding. The title of disappointment was a constant echo in her mind, a reminder of how far she had strayed from the script her family expected her to follow. She felt that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't fit into the image they had of her, and this created a gap, an empty space she filled with the feeling of not being good enough. It was a beginning of a story that saw her as an outlier, an exception to the rules of family success. While Olivia grappled with the weight of being the disappointment, the family's star shone brightly in her younger brother, Rin. Rin was everything expected of an exemplary son. He had followed the script perfectly, graduating summa cum laude in business administration and then securing an enviable job at a respected corporation. News of Rin's promotions, successful projects, and rising salary circulated at family lunches like trophies. He was the pride of the family, proof that the family's golden path was still possible and yielded fruit. For Olivia, Rin was an uncomfortable mirror. Not that she envied him, far from it, but his brilliance highlighted her own shadow. Comparisons, even if unspoken, were constant. Rin is so focused, she'd hear, the sentence left unfinished but the implication clear. Unlike you, Olivia. He was the ideal son, the model to be followed, the type of person who never deviated from the plan. This family dynamic created a subtle barrier between the siblings. Rin, perhaps unaware of the depth of Olivia's discomfort, continued his upward trajectory, validating what their parents always preached. He was confirmation that success came from persistence on the traditional path, a path Olivia had abandoned. Rin's success, therefore, wasn't just his. It was also a validation of family expectations and, consequently, a subtle reminder of Olivia's failure to follow them. Olivia saw Rin as the personification of the right way, while she felt lost on a detour without a map. With each of Rin's achievements, she felt the pressure increase, the need to justify herself, to show that her life also had value, even outside the family's parameters. The contrast was painful. While one climbed the corporate ladder, the other searched for new ground to start over. Without the same recognition or support her brother enjoyed, the family openly celebrated Rin, and this only made Olivia feel that her own journey, though different, was less worthy of celebration. It was a period of self-questioning and searching for a new purpose, away from the spotlight and constant comparisons. Tired of the weight of expectations and Rin's dazzling brilliance, Olivia began to seek her own path, away from the spotlight and family pressure. She needed something to make her feel useful, something to fill the void left by medical school. The answer came from an unexpected place, very close to home. It all started simply. In her neighborhood, there were many elderly people who, despite being full of life and stories, felt somewhat lost in the technological advancements. Emails, video calls with grandchildren, online payments, it all seemed like a Herculean task. Olivia, who who always had a natural aptitude for technology and the patience of Job, noticed this difficulty. She saw a need, an opportunity to help in a way no one else was. So, in an almost informal way, Olivia began to teach classes. At first, they were private lessons, one-on-one, at the students' homes. Sitting at Mrs. Clara's kitchen table, Olivia taught her how to send an email to her daughter, who lived far away. With John, she unlocked the mysteries of online banking, showing him how to pay bills without leaving home. These were basic lessons, yes, but for him, they represented a world of possibilities. These meetings weren't just about clicks and passwords. They were about connection. Olivia realized that what she was offering wasn't just technical knowledge, but a bridge for these people to stay connected to the world and their loved ones. She saw the sparkle in their eyes when they managed a video call with a grandchild living abroad, or when they could read online news that had previously seemed inaccessible. Word of mouth spread through the neighborhood. Olivia teaches really well. She has a calming presence that we understand, the neighbors said. Soon, demand grew. One private lesson became 2, then 3, until Olivia found herself with a full schedule. She was finding purpose, something that made her feel good about herself, far from comparisons and unmet expectations. This modest work, almost invisible to her family, was a small refuge for Olivia. There she wasn't the disappointment. She was Olivia who helps with the computer, Olivia who makes us feel less stupid. It was a new role built by herself, brick by brick, based on patience, empathy, and a genuine passion for helping. It was the embryo of something much bigger, a small but significant step on a journey she couldn't have imagined where it would lead. Far from university degrees and large offices, Olivia was planting the seeds of her own success in entirely new ground. What started as informal tech lessons for seniors quickly surpassed Olivia's expectations. Those one-on-one sessions at kitchen tables soon transformed into something much larger. Demand grew so much that she could no longer serve everyone individually. That's when the idea of expanding began to bubble in her mind. Olivia realized the need was widespread. It wasn't just Clara or John who needed help. It was an entire generation that was being left behind by the digital revolution. Video calls with family, access to online information, internet security, all of this became a chasm for many, and she had the key to build bridges over that chasm. The private lessons evolved into group classes in the neighborhood community room. Instead of one person, Olivia taught 5-10 at a time. The interaction between the students themselves was a bonus. They helped each other, shared doubts, and even created a sense of community. The next logical step was webinars, online lectures that allowed her to reach even more people. Without geographical barriers, Olivia learned to handle broadcasting platforms, create clear presentations, and answer hundreds of questions in real time. But Olivia's vision went beyond one-off classes. She wanted to create a permanent resource, a place where seniors could learn at their own pace, anytime. That's how Elder Bright was born. The name, a combination of elder and bright, reflected the intention to illuminate the digital path for this generation. Elder Bright wasn't just a website with videos. It was an online platform designed from scratch to be intuitive and user-friendly for those unfamiliar with technology. Its goal was clear: to help people over 60 stay connected in a digital world that often left them behind. Olivia designed the teaching modules with care and attention to detail. There were courses on using email to communicate with family, hands-on lessons on video conferencing to see grandchildren, step-by-step guides for online banking and payments, and, crucially, lessons on digital security to avoid scams and fraud. Everything was explained in simple language, with short videos and practical exercises. She knew that patience was key, and the platform's design reflected this, with large fonts, clear buttons, and straightforward navigation. Elder Bright wasn't just about learning to click, it was about empowerment. It was about giving a voice to a generation that often felt isolated and invisible in the modern world. Olivia was building more than a website. She was building a tool for social inclusion, a bridge for many to rediscover their autonomy and reconnect with the world around them. This was her new passion, her own way of making a mark, far from the shadow of medicine and family expectations. Despite the impressive growth and the real impact Elder Bright was having, Olivia's success remained largely silent to her family. In the 3 years following the platform's launch, Elder Bright took off in a way Olivia never imagined. She was no longer just a computer teacher for seniors. Her platform had become a vital resource for thousands of people. The numbers were impressive: over 80,000 active users nationwide, This wasn't just a metric, it was 80,000 stories of grandparents who were able to talk to their grandchildren again via video call, of retirees who learned to shop online safely, of people who felt less alone because they could connect with interest groups. Elderbright wasn't just technology, it was human connection. Professional recognition also began to arrive. Small state partnerships were established, expanding the platform's reach. Articles in blogs specializing in assistive technology and digital inclusion began to cite Elderbright's work as an example of social innovation. Olivia, without realizing it, was becoming a reference in a niche she had largely created herself. However, at home within the Red family, none of this seemed to make the slightest difference. At Sunday lunches, conversations still revolved around Rin's career, his corporate successes, and how he was on the right track. If the conversation happened to turn to Olivia, it was always with the same connotation of pity or mild frustration. She remained the daughter who had abandoned the golden path. To them, Elderbright wasn't a successful venture. It was just Olivia's hobby with computers. They didn't grasp the impact, the national reach, the lives being transformed. The family was so fixated on the image of the doctor who wasn't, that they simply couldn't see the brilliant social entrepreneur she had become. It was as if Olivia's success didn't fit into the boxes they had built for her. There was no formal medical degree to hang on the wall, no position in a large corporation to impress friends. What she did was different, and because it was different, it was devalued or simply ignored. Olivia, despite building something grand and significant, still felt the weight of not being enough for her own family. This silent acknowledgement, coming from thousands of anonymous users, contrasted painfully with the lack of recognition from the people who mattered most to her. It was a success that resonated loudly in the world, but echoed in an almost inaudible whisper within her home. Despite the impressive growth and the real impact Elderbright was having, Olivia's success remained largely silent to her family. In the 3 years following the platform's launch, Elderbright took off in a way Olivia never imagined. She was no longer just a computer teacher for seniors. Her platform had become a vital resource for thousands of people. The numbers were impressive, over 80,000 active users nationwide. This wasn't just a metric, it was 80,000 stories of grandparents who were able to reconnect with their grandchildren via video call, of retirees who learned to shop online safely, of people who felt less alone because they could connect with interest groups. Elderbright wasn't just technology, it was human connection. Professional recognition also began to arrive. Small state partnerships were established, expanding the platform's reach. Articles in blogs specializing in assistive technology and digital inclusion began to cite Elderbright's work as an example of social innovation. Olivia, without realizing it, was becoming a reference in a niche she had largely created. However, at home, within the Red family, none of this seemed to make the slightest difference. On Sunday lunches, conversations still revolved around Rin's career, his corporate successes, and how he was on the right track. If the topic happened to turn to Olivia, it was always with the same connotation of pity or slight frustration. She remained the daughter who had abandoned the golden path. To them, Elderbright wasn't a successful venture. It was just Olivia's hobby with computers. They didn't grasp the impact, the national reach, the lives being transformed. The family was so fixated on the image of the doctor who wasn't, that they simply couldn't see the brilliant social entrepreneur she had become. It was as if Olivia's success didn't fit into the boxes they had built for her. There was no formal medical degree to hang on the wall, no position in a large corporation to impress friends. What she did was different, and because it was different, it was undervalued or simply ignored. Olivia, despite building something grand and significant, still felt the weight of not being enough for her own family. This silent acknowledgement, coming from thousands of anonymous users, contrasted painfully with the lack of recognition from the people who mattered most to her. It was a success that resonated loudly in the world, but echoed in an almost inaudible whisper within her home. Olivia's life continued, with Elderbright silently prospering, while family recognition seemed a distant mirage. However, the universe has its own plans for aligning things. The turnaround Olivia least expected was about to happen, and it would come from a completely unexpected source: Amanda, her brother Rin's fiancée. It all started when Olivia received a video testimonial. This wasn't unusual. Elderbright had a habit of collecting these testimonials from its users to showcase the platform's impact. But this particular video would be different. Upon pressing play, Olivia saw the smiling face of Amanda, the same Amanda she had known at the family's Sunday lunches, always polite and somewhat oblivious to what Olivia actually did. Amanda began the video explaining how Elderbright had been a game-changer for her grandmother Margaret, especially after the loss of Amanda's grandfather. The grief had been overwhelming, and her grandmother, a vibrant woman, had withdrawn into herself, feeling isolated and disconnected from the world. The computer and the internet, once a mystery, had become an insurmountable barrier to her communicating with family and the outside world. Then Amanda, searching for something to help her grandmother, found Elderbright. She enrolled Margaret in the platform, and what followed was a transformation. Amanda's grandmother Margaret, who previously barely knew how to turn on a computer, had begun using email to message family and make video calls, seeing the faces of her children and grandchildren who lived far away. Elderbright didn't just teach digital skills, it brought back the joy of connection, the feeling of belonging. While watching the video, Olivia felt a surge of emotion. Margaret, with a genuine smile and teary eyes, appeared beside Amanda, looking directly at the camera and saying something that deeply touched Olivia. "Thank you, Olivia. You helped me feel human again." The impact of those words was immense. Margaret had no idea that Olivia Red, the founder of Elderbright, was Amanda's family's disappointment. To Margaret, Olivia was the person behind the tool that had rescued her from isolation, that had given her a new perspective on life. This acknowledgement from a complete stranger, someone whose life had been genuinely touched by her work, was worth more than any forced family praise. For Olivia, it was a moment of validation. It was living proof of her work's purpose, a powerful testament that, unbeknownst to her, would be the key to unlocking her own family's understanding. The irony was palpable. Her brother's fiancée, the same person who often praised Rin for his focus, in contrast to Olivia's free spirit, would be the unwitting messenger of her true success. It was the missing piece for the Red family to finally see the grandeur of what Olivia was building. The truth was about to come to light, not from Olivia's mouth, but from the voice of gratitude. Rin and Amanda's long-awaited engagement dinner finally arrived. Olivia's parents' house was full, with the family gathered and the buzz of lively conversations filling the air. Olivia was there, as always, a little on the periphery of the more effusive celebrations. Accustomed to her understated role, she chatted politely, smiling and nodding, but felt the familiar tension in the air, the unspoken expectation that she should have something more to present. At one point in the evening, Amanda, radiant beside Rin, approached Olivia. With the casualness of someone asking a question at a family gathering, Amanda inquired, "So, Olivia, what have you been up to lately? Tell me about your work." The question, for Olivia, was familiar. Usually she would give a vague answer, something about helping people with technology, trying to deflect the subject to avoid the pitying look or lack of interest that would follow. But this time, something was different. Olivia felt an impulse. Perhaps it was the video of Amanda and Margaret reverberating in her mind, or perhaps just a newfound courage to speak openly about what she had built. She began explaining Elderbright, how the platform helped seniors connect with the digital world, learn email and video calls, and feel less isolated. She spoke with quiet passion, explaining the mission and impact concisely. As Olivia spoke, Amanda listened with an expression that shifted from curiosity to surprise, and finally to undeniable shock. Amanda's eyes widened, and a stunned recognition shone in them. She started connecting the dots. Elderbright. The name sounded so familiar. The mission was exactly what she'd been searching for her grandmother. Suddenly, Amanda exclaimed, almost breathlessly, You're the founder of Elderbright." The question, laden with disbelief and genuine admiration, stopped the conversation at the small table. Rin and Olivia's parents, who until then had barely paid attention, looked at Amanda and then at Olivia, confused. Amanda then, without waiting for an answer, turned to the table and, with infectious excitement, began to reveal what she'd just discovered to everyone. "Everyone, you won't believe this. Olivia, she's the founder of Elderbright, the platform I told you about that helped Grandma Margaret so much." Amanda's voice was loud enough to attract the attention of other guests. She continued, enumerating Elderbright's achievements with an enthusiasm Olivia had never seen from her own family. "She was featured in NPR and Forbes. She's changing lives. Grandma wouldn't be feeling so good now if it weren't for Elderbright." The murmur at the table subsided, replaced by a shocked silence. Olivia's parents especially had their eyes fixed on her, a mixture of confusion and a new curiosity they had never shown before. Rin looked surprised, perhaps even a little embarrassed for not knowing. The truth, once a secret kept by Olivia and her 80,000 users, was finally revealed explosively, not by herself, but by an outsider who saw the true value of her work. That engagement dinner, which should have been about Rin and Amanda, had unexpectedly become the stage for Olivia's recognition. The silence that followed Amanda's outburst at the engagement dinner was palpable, a silence laden with surprise and, for Olivia's family, perhaps even a dose of embarrassment. The truth about Elderbright, once a whisper in the digital world, now resonated loudly in the dining room. That moment was the catalyst that finally began to change the family's perception of Olivia. The first to react was Rin. His face, usually so composed and confident, showed a mixture of shock and what seemed to be genuine guilt. He looked at Olivia, then at Amanda, and a silent apology seemed to pass through his eyes. "Olivia," he began, his voice a little lower than normal, I'm so sorry. I never really asked what you were doing. I should have." Rin's apology wasn't just for not asking, it was for underestimating, for focusing only on his own path and not seeing the brilliance in his sisters. It was the first crack in the perfect brother image, and a sign he was beginning to see Olivia in a new light. Olivia's parents were the most affected. Her mother, who always clung to the narrative that Olivia was just taking some time off, had her version of events completely shattered. Amanda's mention of NPR and Forbes weren't terms that could be easily dismissed as a hobby. Those were references to real world-class success. She looked at Olivia with a new intensity, almost as if seeing her for the first time. The rigidity in her posture began to soften, and she seemed to be, somehow, recalibrating her narrative about Olivia. The rebellious or lost daughter was being redefined in real time as a successful entrepreneur. Olivia's father, always more reserved in his expressions, had a look of profound questioning. The disappointment he carried seemed to be challenged by a mixture of surprise and perhaps a budding pride he couldn't yet process. What he saw wasn't the doctor he expected, but something equally, or even more, impressive. That dinner wasn't just a revelation for the family, it was a mirror. They were confronted with their own short-sightedness, with how their preconceived expectations had prevented them from seeing their daughter's talent and impact. The shame of not having supported or even understood what Olivia was building was palpable. For Olivia, seeing this change, however subtle, was an immense relief. It wasn't a matter of, "I told you so," but rather of finally being seen, being understood. The walls of misunderstanding that surrounded her in her own home began to crumble. The seed of recognition, planted by a stranger, began to blossom in her family's hearts, promising a future where she might no longer be the disappointment, but simply Olivia, the woman who, in her own way, was truly changing lives. The revelation at the engagement dinner opened a crack in the family's wall of misunderstanding, and the first concrete sign that things were changing came from Olivia's mother. 2 days after that memorable dinner, Olivia received a letter. It wasn't a quick email or a text message. It was a handwritten letter, something her mother rarely did, and that alone indicated the seriousness of what was to come. Opening the envelope, Olivia felt a lump in her throat. Her mother's words weren't the ones she was used to reading, full of veiled advice or comments about what she could have been. Instead, the letter was a sincere and painful apology. "My dearest Olivia," the letter began, the handwriting a little shaky. "I don't know how to begin to say how sorry I am. I'm sorry for never truly asking about what you were building. I'm sorry for focusing so much on what you left behind in medical school, instead of seeing what you were creating anew." Olivia's mother admitted she had been blinded by her own expectations and the fear that her daughter wouldn't have a secure or respected future in the eyes of society. She wrote about how Rin's success, while a source of pride, had inadvertently cast a shadow over Olivia's endeavors, causing the family to focus only on a limited definition of success. But what touched Olivia most was her mother's profound reflection on courage. "I realized, through what Amanda told us and through that woman's testimony, the true strength you possess," the letter continued. "You had the courage to keep failing, to try new things even when your father and I didn't understand. And in doing so, you not only found yourself but taught others to find their voices again in the digital world." That phrase, "keep failing," resonated with Olivia. It was the acceptance that her path wasn't linear, that there were stumbles, but that the resilience to keep going was a strength, not a weakness. And the recognition that she was helping others find their voices was the greatest compliment she could receive. It was the acknowledgement of the human impact of her work, not just the numbers or magazine articles. The letter ended with a promise. a promise to listen more, to see more, and to support Olivia on her own journey regardless of what others might think. It was an apology not only for the unspoken words, but for the actions and omissions that made her feel invisible and undervalued. For Olivia, that letter represented more than a simple, "I'm sorry." It was the beginning of healing an old wound, a crucial step towards reconciliation and mutual understanding within her own family. Part 10. Triumph and Lasting Connection. Rin's wedding was a beautiful day, full of joy and celebration. For Olivia, however, it held a deeper meaning than just her brother's union with Amanda. It was a milestone, the culmination of a journey of self-discovery and, finally, familial recognition. In the festive atmosphere, Olivia watched her mother. Far from the rigidity and worry of the past, Olivia's mother radiated a new lightness. And then, in a moment Olivia would never forget, her mother gently pulled her by the arm, leading her to a group of family friends. With a wide smile and a glint of pride in her eyes that Olivia had rarely seen, she introduced, "This is my daughter Olivia. She runs a national non-profit organization." The words hung in the air. National non-profit. These were terms that carried weight and respect, and Olivia noticed her mother pronounced them with an authenticity that went beyond mere formality. There was no longer a need to justify leaving college or soften her path. There was instead complete acceptance and genuine pride. Later, in a quiet moment, her mother approached again. Her voice choked with emotion. She told Olivia, "I used to think you were lost, Olivia, for following such a different path, for not fitting into what I expected. But now I see you weren't lost, you were simply ahead of the curve." This phrase touched Olivia deeply. Ahead of the curve. Not a detour, but a vanguard. Not a failure, but an innovation. Her mother didn't just accept her, she saw her as a pioneer, someone who dared to forge a new path and, in doing so, opened doors for many others. The story concluded with a gesture from Olivia that sealed this new era of understanding and connection. Days after the wedding, she prepared a special package for Rin and Amanda. Inside, there wasn't a traditional gift, but something far more meaningful, a customized version of Elderbright. She had adapted the platform specifically for the nursing home, where Amanda's grandmother, Margaret, had spent her final years before passing away peacefully. It was a gift that transcended the material. It was a symbol of gratitude to Amanda for unwittingly revealing the truth about Elderbright, and, more importantly, it was a recognition of the deep connection that had been forged between Olivia's family and the impact of her work. That final gesture, a link between past and future, showed that although the paths may have been winding, family understanding and love had finally found their way, celebrating the remarkable woman Olivia Red had become.